Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to what's between you and lunch right now. I'm really pleased to have here Paul Abfalter from Telstra, Paul based in Hong Kong. Paul, I'm going to ask the hardest question first, because this is usually the question that's asked at the end of a session like this. So we've been through a pretty tumultuous decade, I think is safe to say, with all the kinds of disruptions that have gone on. From a carrier perspective, from an international carrier perspective, what is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? What's the market structure going to be like?
Well, I think in terms of the way we're planning sort of 5 and 10 years out, we see the market structure in areas like subsea as being increasingly fewer participants, obviously, and fewer builds, but obviously with a lot more fibre pairs. I think the market's been heading that way over the last couple of decades. If you look at AAG compared to, say, PLCN or HKA, 19 parties versus 5 or 6 for both of those, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think in terms of the role of carriers in the market generally, I think you're going to see people needing to differentiate more and more up and down the stack. I think the bit in the middle, the product layer, is going to become a little bit more ubiquitous, and the carriers are going to really need to differentiate with really unique infrastructure, or differentiate on the people side up the stack, like from a professional services point of view, or in areas like subsea, just by having the best and the best engineering teams in the region.
Right. In terms of that, you just mentioned the customer types, and that you've got to be looking at how it is that when you're building out your infrastructure, where you're going to get your revenue from. Right, so in terms of customer types, are you seeing the hyperscalers, the app providers, the data centers, the traditional enterprise, SMB, retail consumers? Where's it coming from?
Look, so for us, we're the #1 owner of subsea in APAC. So for us, we're the #1 provider to a lot of the largest cloud and content companies in the world throughout APAC. So that's a really big market for us. We like to think ourselves as a carrier's carrier in APAC, so we've got obviously a massive wholesale carrier business. But then our enterprise business is also really significantly sized and quite important to us as well. So we do a lot in the financial segment, particularly from a low latency point of view, but then also for the tier 1 financials. Media is very, very important to us. We've got a big global broadcast media business, very well renowned, and very, very specialist. And areas like manufacturing are really important to us. If you think of that manufacturing link from Europe to Asia, we do a lot of that connectivity, particularly connecting countries like Germany and China, and we're seeing more and more of that connectivity getting closer and closer.
What is the traffic like in Asia for that?
From a manufacturing point of view? Oh, look, I think the growth's been phenomenal in some areas. I mean, we're the largest foreign carrier in places like Taiwan and China and Korea, which have got massive manufacturing bases. So we look after some of the largest car companies in the world, for instance, and we do a lot of their Pan-Asian connectivity, a lot of their in-country connectivity, and increasingly connecting them to other parts of the world. The US, we're the #1 provider of capacity from Hong Kong to the US, Greater China to the US. And there's a lot of, as factories automate more and more, we're seeing them connect in real time more and more, and so the demand for that low latency traffic connecting factories in many instances around the world is increasing over time.
Right. How then, you mentioned that you think the number of carriers in that might decrease, and we've been hearing that from a lot of people over time. How do you remain relevant in all this space? I mean, you say you have the customers and that, but really, how do you remain relevant as an international carrier?
I think, and I think their participation in things like submarine cable builds I think there'll be fewer and fewer. So I don't necessarily think that you'll see less and less carriers. I think there's a number of ways in which we differentiate. So we differentiate with really unique infrastructure. That's the first thing. Really unique positions in a number of really difficult to operate markets in Asia. That's something we've built up over 5 or 6 decades. The reason why we built that is because of the way we partner and the people we've got, the quality of the engineering teams. So differentiating from a people point of view, either on the engineering side at the bottom of the stack, or then differentiating at the top of the stack from a professional services go-to-market side. So I'll give you an example of that. We've over the last several years, we've put together a professional services business. We've gone and acquired 7 companies that we've now rebranded and brought in under one umbrella, and that's 1,500 people that are certified experts around the world in cloud, in collaboration, in security, and that's a hugely important business to us in the enterprise segment especially, but also increasingly in the carrier segment. Hugely important in terms of how we go to market and how we add value to customers at the top of the stack. So differentiating from a people point of view, differentiating from a really unique infrastructure point of view, really important. That professional services business, we've rebranded Telstra Purple in July. We spent a lot of time talking about the strategy of that business, and we came up with an internal brand, Purple. It's all about putting purpose and people together, hence the name Telstra Purple. Interestingly enough, we don't use the colour purple in the brand. So
you're not wearing purple.
No, that's exactly right. So, but that's a really important part of the business for us.
Cool. What matters most to you then in terms of all this business development and the opportunities you have and that many other carriers have now in the new space? What's mattering the most in terms of technological changes? Is it the technology or is it the services that you have to develop?
Look, it's both. From a technology point of view, at the bottom of the stack, just the amount of capacity we're getting for our CapEx is hugely important. So those technological advances in terms of yield over the last few years have been really, really important to us. And a lot of you have seen we've been the leader in the market with that. I think the first 1.2 terabit cards in the market was a big trial that we did with one of our vendors. So that's really important to us. But then, increasingly, SD-WAN in the enterprise market, massively important to us. We've got one of the largest IP networks in Asia. We're doing more and more SD-WAN over IP over the last year or so. That's really important to us from a technology point of view. And then at a deeper level, in terms of the longer term, the way we automate and the way we integrate with other telcos and other technology providers, really, really important. We made an announcement this week with Equinix in terms of APIing our programmable network, our self-built software definable network from a capacity point of view, integrating that into Equinix's global cloud fabric. And that's enabled us just to access twice as many markets as we were from an Equinix point of view, as well as increasing our access to a lot more cloud providers than what we had in the market. So the way the carriers, particularly carriers like us that are very, very strong in one region, sort of federate globally, and the way we integrate with other telcos are hugely important to us in terms of technology change.
Right. What are some of the differences that you see, not only at your own company, but in terms of the wholesale business, especially in terms of the types of customers that you have in a mobile, hyperscale, video, social media? Are they different or are they fundamentally the same?
There are a lot of differences there. Even within the financial services segment, you've got demand for large capacity there, sometimes at the fibre pair level. Sometimes that's data centre to data centre, right? But then you've got lots of bespoke players and lots of specific use cases. We do a lot with high frequency traders. We're one of the leading low latency providers in APAC. I think most of the routes in APAC, we are the fastest provider. And so we do a huge amount of work with the financial services segment on that. We've rebranded that Telstra Octagon. It's a specific number of 8 routes that form an octagon that we're the fastest on within APAC. That's very important to us. So even within different customer segments, it's certainly low latency. We are seeing more and more demand and more use cases for that, particularly with live gaming and what have you. Right. And even within the cloud and content segment, the variety is quite significant in terms of that mixture of IP versus pure capacity, as well as areas like latency and what have you. So
That latency issue is kind of interesting. That's something that's always been touted with cable and fiber being far superior, for instance, than satellite. What's happening with the LEO satellites? What is your view of the competitive position of a company like Telstra, a traditional carrier, undersea fiber, and with the LEOs coming up?
Look, we love LEO. We really do. We're probably in a unique position in the industry to really embrace it. We're one of the largest teleport providers in the world. So we've got two largest satellite earth stations in Asia, one in Stanley in Hong Kong and one in Western Australia. The use cases that LEO are bringing to the market in terms of they're really helping to disrupt and revolutionise the industry. They're filling gaps from a pricing point of view, and some of those are just really important commercial use cases. But then a number of them, we do a lot of work with people like OneWeb. They've got phenomenal education use cases in some of the most remote parts of Asia and Australia and Africa and what have you. So we don't see them as a threat. We partner with them a lot. There's certainly a part of our business that we do a lot of business with them now, and we do support them a lot, quite a number of them globally. We've got a lot of respect for what those LEO operators are doing in the industry.
Very good. Wondering if I could just riff on that just a little bit here in terms of what else in other areas you think you actually need to begin to cooperate more on. I mean, international carriers for decades have been fairly self-contained and even arrogant about how they can go about even providing services and marketing in the market structure that they control. Is that the reality anymore? Who do you have to partner with now to be successful?
Well, I think the technology provider is really, really important. I think part of what we've got really good at the last few years is just focusing on those areas where we can competitively differentiate, where we think we can be the very best in the market, but then also partnering where we need to from a tech point of view. That could be sometimes on infrastructure. We've deprioritised data centres a little bit, for instance, in some parts of the world. With the exception of China, where we've doubled down. We made an announcement on that this week in terms of a unique partnership with Chaora, a new hyperscale provider in China, where we're the co-location operator and network provider to that facility, and we've got a very big data center business there. But elsewhere, we've got very close partnerships with people like Equinix. But then in terms of moving up the stack from a technology point of view, increasingly we're trying to co-develop with technology vendors from a hardware point of view. And we've got very close relationships with the Cienas and the Infineras of the world, and we do some bespoke development with them and sometimes some bespoke box builds with them. I think in terms of cooperating with other carriers, I do think one thing that's going to be important increasingly in the next sort of 5 to 10 years is how we interconnect better from a technology point of view, and how that marries with how we digitise and make things easier for customers from a technology point of view. I think as we look to automate more and digitise more, how we then do that with each other across the industry, we've got much better at doing that from a pricing point of view, a go-to-market point of view. Increasingly, we're doing that a little bit from a back-of-house point of view as well.
Given that that a number of new things are coming mainstream, I'm just wondering how that might affect you with private mobile networks, with open source. Even talk to us about what 5G is doing to you.
And look, 5G is hugely important to us in Australia. Australia is a market where operating a fixed or mobile network is not the easiest market in the world. I know a lot of you will probably look at the Australian market and think, wow, that place is really expensive for connectivity. It costs a lot of money to get there. And then once you're there, it's got some of the most expensive terrestrial transport and IP in the world. In our defence, there are more kangaroos than people in Australia. And it's a massive landmass, and network economics there aren't great. But 5G is hugely important to us there. We were the leader in 4G in that market, and we were first in market with 5G, and we've got a couple hundred sites already live there. So I think where it's going to affect the industry and the rest of the world, I think it's going to help push those use cases, and I think you're going to see 5G working closely with people like the low orbit satellite people as well in terms of pushing those IoT use cases. We are starting to do a lot of work in IoT with people like the automotive manufacturers around the world. We've gone and invested up the stack in one IoT business specifically to help us do that. So I think we see it as a force for good. We certainly don't see it necessarily as sort of a competitive threat. I think in our home market, it's hugely important to us, and in our global market, it's very complementary to what we're doing. We've got big terrestrial backhaul networks throughout Asia, but we don't have a lot of, we don't have a huge amount of domestic fibre in terms of local access, so we're not too worried about it. We're very much embracing the 5G revolution and hope it arrives quicker than what it's been planned.
In terms of competitive pricing, what are you seeing now in terms of your undersea cables in particular? I mean, we hear on Sunday and at this conference with the sub-cable folks and with telegeography on price depressions, and where's the wholesale business going with that?
Look, I think the main thing for us is that capacity growth is still exceeding the price degradation for us. The price degradation, to a certain extent, is a healthy thing in the market. You've got a number of routes in Asia that are still in APAC that are still are quite expensive. Most important thing from our point of view in terms of a business and an economic return is just that capacity growth's got to exceed the price degradation, and in our business it absolutely is. So I think this has been an issue for the industry since the first days of voice, it's the voice business, of which we still have a large international voice business that is still very much profitable, we've managed it with voice for decades and decades, and we're going to manage it with data as well.
I don't want to monopolize all the questions. We got a couple of minutes left. Hard to see. Anyone out there? Any questions? Ask Paul something hard. Asked the hard one already. So, Paul, I'm going to come back in the last minute that we have to the very first question. All right? Given everything you've just said, revise now what the next 5 to 10 years is going to look like.
Oh, for us?
Yes.
Well, as I mentioned, I think for us, what it's going to mean for us is we're going to keep differentiating very hard at the infrastructure layer. So a number of very unique routes and incredibly unique position as the #1 foreign telco in Taiwan and Korea and the Philippines, in mainland China, and one of the top operators and another number of other companies in Asia. So we're going to keep differentiating that infrastructure layer. We're going to keep investing in people, both in terms of that engineering team supporting that infrastructure layer, but then right up the stack from a professional services business as well. And in terms of the bit in the middle, we're going to continue to hopefully be one of the industry leaders from an innovation perspective. We won a few awards on that last night. We cleaned up at the PTC Awards, so go Telstra. It's been one of the leaders in the industry to really help fast track that integration between the telcos, fast track automation, and fast track the evolution of software in our business.
Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Abfalter. Thank you very much.